This video is perhaps a bit overdue. I had intended to talk about Adelaide Cottage, the current residence of the Prince and Princess of Wales, before speaking about Forest Lodge, which will become their future home at the end of the year, but that somehow didn't happen. Like all the structures within the park of Windsor Castle, Adelaide Cottage has an interesting history, although I seem to say that about every single subject that I cover on this channel. It isn't a particularly large house, and when constructed in 1831 it didn't need to be, as it wasn't built to be lived in permanently. And I'm not really surprised that the Prince and Princess are moving to somewhere larger, given that their children are now growing up. Now, before I get onto the subject of the house itself, I first want to have a look at the geographical location of Adelaide Cottage. It is in the home park at Windsor, which is the area directly surrounding the castle. That contrasts with Windsor Great Park, where Forest Lodge and Fort Belvedere are, which is much further to the south beyond Frogmore. Adelaide Cottage is very close to Windsor Castle. Windsor Castle was first established by William the Conqueror in the 1070s, and it's built in a strategic defensive position. It's constructed on top of a chalk ridge above and overlooking the valley of the River Thames. This chalk ridge drops off quite quickly and dramatically towards the river to the north, directly below the castle, where it has been terraced. This ridge and its slope facing the Thames is called the North Slope, and beyond the eastern confines of the castle it gently curves round to the southeast, and it continues for nearly half a mile, gradually getting lower before then petering out. You can see this ridge and the North Slope beautifully depicted in John Rock's map of Windsor Castle from 1738. And Adelaide Cottage is right at the very end of this ridge, just below the last stretch of the North Slope. And the house is sheltered under the slope and is planted around with trees, and is therefore in a rather secluded and private location, which will have suited the Prince and Princess of Wales. The cottage is known as Adelaide Cottage, and in the past it was sometimes called Adelaide Lodge, as it was constructed in 1831 for the use of Queen Adelaide of Saxe-Meiningen, the consort of King William IV. The construction of it was overseen by the prominent architect Sir Jeffrey Wyatville, who in the 1820s had been contracted by George IV to remodel the rather run-down Windsor Castle. Wyatville was a bit of a strange character. He was born in Burton-upon-Trent as plain old Geoffrey Wyatt, and he was part of a dynasty of architects that included his uncles, James and Samuel Wyatt. But unlike his uncles, he had somewhat grandiose pretensions. No surprise, given he'd moved into one of the towers of Windsor Castle, and he added the Ville to his name in 1824 so that nobody could mistake his work for that of his uncles. He had just the sort of romantic visual sensibility that George IV admired, and Wyatville spent much of the 1820s very busy indeed doing works for the king at Windsor. In 1823, George IV moved to Windsor semi-permanently. He found the castle to be cold and uninviting, so he employed his existing architect John Nash to convert what had been the Deputy Ranger's Lodge in Windsor Great Park into a private retreat, an enormous thatched cottage known as the King's Cottage or Royal Lodge. Such cottages, or nay, fancy cottages, were all the rage in this period, where the rich could enter into a form of fantasy escapism, playing at living their idea of the simple rural life of the poor. Although Nash was primarily responsible for the design of this extraordinary cottage, Wyatville, being on hand in Windsor, was also involved in the work there too. In 1830, at his accession, King William IV, for reasons known only to him, ordered the demolition of most of his brother's Royal Lodge. The present Royal Lodge, where Prince Andrew lives, was built in the 20th century on the site of and incorporating a small fragment of Nash and Wyatville's original building. What, you may ask, has this got to do with Adelaide Cottage? Well, prior to 1831, there was a small house on the site of Adelaide Cottage under the north slope that was used by the Deputy Keeper of Home Park. Wyatville remodelled and added to this existing building using reclaimed materials from Royal Lodge. Adelaide Cottage is in essence a remaking of George IV's Royal Lodge. Nicholas Pevsner, in his Buildings of England, using a curious turn of phrase, writes that Adelaide Cottage represents the ghost of George IV's Royal Lodge. Usefully, the 1871 Ordnance Survey Maps gives us a ground plan of the cottage, which helps us understand what Wyatville created in 1831 for Queen Adelaide. The house is evidently in two parts. There's a two-storey south wing and a single-storey north wing. Because of the lay of the land here, the single-storey north wing is at the same level as the first floor of the south wing. I think within the south wing is probably immured the fabric of the old Deputy Keeper's Lodge, and it has been refaced with stucco by Wyatville to cover it up. This wing has a rather austere south front, with the entrance flanked by two towering chimneys, and with a blank wall adorned with the monogram of Queen Adelaide, AR, for Adelaide Regina, and the date 1831. The utilitarian south front is dominated by Gothic-style timber porte cochere designed by Wyatville. This allowed Queen Adelaide to draw up to the front of the house in her carriage and enter it without getting wet. In this south wing there was also a small retiring room where she could take off her coat, and there was room for her pages and for other staff, a kitchen and other offices, all the things needed by the Queen to comfortably enjoy her day in her cottage. With fewer domestic servants today, this wing makes for a quite comfortable and substantial family home, with space for 4 bedrooms, and it is where the Wales's main accommodation must be. Beside and attached by a low wall to this south wing, Wyatville built a little Gothic keeper's cottage with a diminutive tower. A narrow corridor runs from the main door through the centre of the south wing to a staircase that then leads up to the north wing, which is the cottage proper, if you like. It's a single-storey structure which was brand new in 1831 and is entirely the work of Wyatville. And it is this structure that reflects really the spirit of the old Royal Lodge. This wing, this north wing, contains only 2 rooms, a hexagonal drawing room and a rectangular dining room. When constructed by Queen Adelaide in 1831, the purpose of the cottage was to provide a small retreat for the Queen during the day. She wasn't sleeping here. All she needed really were these 2 rooms where she could engage in whatever recreation she had in hand, have luncheon and take tea. This north wing is built in a sort of Tudor Gothic, with elaborate carved timber barge boards and a timber veranda that runs around 2 sides of the dining room, all architectural elements that were recycled from the Royal Lodge. I'm afraid I have absolutely no idea what the house looks like on the inside, and I can't show you any photographs of it. The listed building record for the house says that the principal bedroom has a coved ceiling with gilded dolphins and rope ornament reused from the royal yacht Royal George, and that there is a good marble Greco-Egyptian fireplace. The royal yacht, the Royal George, was in service from 1817 to 1842 and was used by William IV and Queen Adelaide. It was broken up in 1905, having been used for a time as an accommodation hulk. It is likely that these gilded dolphins were brought to the house then and installed, and presumably the principal bedroom is in the south wing. Such details in records are so tantalising. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a peek inside? One of the notable features of the dining and drawing rooms in the north wing is that they all have French doors, which can be swung open to let lots of air in and to connect the cottage to the garden that surrounds it. The garden established here by Queen Adelaide was an important feature of this little retreat right from the beginning. Early watercolours from the 1830s and 1840s show a garden arranged informally in the cottage style, with small beds and borders full of roses and a little fountain. The fountain is still in situ. In the 1871 map of the house and gardens, these little island beds can still be seen. To the north and slightly above the house was an ancient oak tree, probably dating from the 17th century, which was evidently quite a feature of the garden, with a little seat around its base. Built into the chalk of the north slope, beneath the house was the castle's ice house, where ice was laid up for winter to be used during the warmer months when the royal family were in residence. Queen Adelaide first took up residence in her little retreat on her 39th birthday, August the 13th, 1831. The Mirror, on the 20th of August of 1831, praised the quaint elegance of the building of the embellished order of domestic architecture in the Old English School, and considered the house entirely complementary to Queen Adelaide's taste. Now, at the time that the cottage was built for Queen Adelaide, the north slope in Windsor Home Park was not in the least secluded as it is today. It was an industrial landscape. There were chalk quarries along it and lime kilns belching out smoke. This painting of the late 18th century by Princess Elizabeth III, daughter of George III and Queen Charlotte, a very talented artist, shows one of the brick lime kilns and one of the chalk quarries, a short distance from Adelaide Cottage on the north slope. From the 1830s, this industrial landscape began to be tamed, and the north slope was redeveloped as a pleasure ground for the royal family, a place where they could escape from the confines of the castle for exercise. Paths and rides were laid in it among the trees that lined the top of the ridge. By the late 1830s, it must have been a very pleasant walk or ride from the castle to the cottage. The old lime kiln, shown in Princess Elizabeth's painting, was converted by Wyatville into a little Chinese pagoda-style temple, with a seat that gave wide-ranging views across the landscape towards the Thames. There was a place to stop to reflect on the walk towards the cottage. Sadly, this feature has long gone. In the quarry close by, Prince Albert created a rockery for his collection of alpine plants, and little flint and pebble-lined grottos were cut out of the rock face, and trees removed to frame vistas from the ridge back towards the castle. Queen Victoria used Adelaide Cottage early in her reign in much the same way as Queen Adelaide did herself, as a little retreat from the strictures of court life. She would go there with her little spaniel Dash, and when he died in 1840, he was apparently buried in the garden of the cottage. Queen Victoria would continue to use the cottage until the death of Prince Albert. Queen Victoria's family would use the cottage on and off as a little retreat until the 1930s. In Queen Mary's photograph album, there are photos of Queen Alexandra, King George V and Queen Mary and their children enjoying the peace and seclusion of the place. King George and his sons are even shown mowing the lawn. In the 20th century, the house became a grace and favour residence for courtiers and those connected with the royal family. In 1944, Group Captain Peter Townsend, the equerry to King George VI and later the paramour of Princess Margaret, lived here. Before the Waleses moved in 2022, it was for some years the residence of Simon and Susan Rhodes. The former was the son of the late Queen's cousin Margaret Rhodes, and Susan was an extra lady in waiting to the Queen. The question is, who will move into this charming cottage now, once the Prince and Princess of Wales move out? Thanks for watching. Over on my website yesterday, I launched my antiquary calendar for next year. For 2026, the theme of this wall calendar is the medieval year, and it is illustrated in full colour with illuminations from late medieval manuscripts showing the labours of the months. It would make both a delightful and a practical gift for friends, family, or even as a treat for yourself. I have a very limited stock of these, and last year I sold out rather quickly, so if you want a chance of getting one, pop over to my website and grab one while you can. The link is in the description below.